So hi, I'm Jesse St. Laurent, the VP of Product Strategy with SimpliVity. What I'd like to do today is walk through a demo of our technology, give you a quick overview of how all the pieces and parts work. Brian Knudson's going to drive, and I'll talk through the demo as we walk through it. So this demo is running out of our lab in Boston. And what you see is what we would call a 2+1. So there's two OmniCubes in this RTP data center. There's one in what we call a Sydney data center. And we're going to look through the demo at three different levels. At the highest level, we'll look at the federation view. So this is a global view of the entire environment. So I didn't describe the federation. The federation is all OmniCubes within your infrastructure, quite simplistically. They all collaborate, and that's the federation. Then we'll drill down to a data center view of the environment, and then we'll look down into a single virtual machine view.
Do you have a plugin for the web client?
So the web client, let me make sure I'm careful with everybody's NDA information. The web client will come out with the next major release of vSphere.
So in your federation, is it chatty? Are the OmniCubes always?
Yeah. Well, so I had to say it's chatty. They all communicate with each other. By design, it's not supposed to be chatty, but in the sense of it's not pushing a tremendous amount of information. It's more a simple question of, are you there? Are you healthy? Are you there? Are you healthy? Making sure that it understands the state of the connectivity of the federation. So
what is the interval? So how often does it go out and talk?
I don't know off the top of my head. I can check for you though. Yeah, I don't know what the number is, but it's they communicate all with each other. And actually, I should be more precise about that. They don't necessarily all communicate with each other. They communicate with the systems that they have connectivity to. So you could actually have an environment that it doesn't have to be every system has connectivity to every system. So common deployment scenario is if we think of a remote office, branch office deployment where your branch offices might be router SimpliVity. Right, so all the pieces and parts that used to be in a branch office, in a lot of cases, you can get rid of. Most likely, if you've got a bunch of those branch offices, the branch offices don't talk to each other. So that's fine. We're not going to try and talk to all the other branches. The system will figure out that there's a hub, there's a bunch of spokes. That's how it's supposed to work. So
is there an election process, or do you actually pick primary?
It does that. So the federation is designed to be very intelligent. So we have a bunch of guys, distributed systems experts. Turns out that's harder to say than you might think. Who do just this, right? So some of the most cutting edge research in industry is happening with our team in this space. We have a bunch of PhDs working on this stuff. It's part of our core IP. The federation and the fact that some of the things that we make look very simple, the fact that they're even possible, we think is pretty significant. So you don't have to configure this. When you deploy a node, you basically tell it to join the federation. That's the extent of, and you have to obviously give it an IP and some basic information. After that, you set it free. It goes on its own. It communicates with all the other cubes, figures out what data center it's in, what data centers it can see, who it can talk to, who it can't, etc.
So is that to say it operates in a hub and spoke versus mesh?
It can operate either way. So you could have an environment that's full mesh. You could have an environment that has partial connectivity as well. It depends. There's different use cases, right? There are some customers. If you have 3 major data centers, chances are it's all full mesh, and you actually want it all full mesh. If you've got a bunch of branch offices, chances are you don't want those branch offices all trying to communicate with each other, and there's no connectivity in most cases. So let's start at the high level with the federation view. You'll notice that there's a SimpliVity tab here. Obviously, the web client looks quite different. We tech previewed it at VMworld, so there's probably video online if folks are interested in the web client. We show the federation view here, and you see Sydney and RTP are 2 data centers. Let's pop open a policy. So if we look at the bronze daily policy here, and we just go to create a new rule for that, you have a set of policies within the environment, and a policy is a set of rules. Can you do a new rule? And a rule is very simple. How often do I back this VM up? How long do I keep the backup for? Where do I send it? And if we look at the contents of the destination menu, the contents are RTP and Sydney. Those are the potential destinations. So you'll notice there's no IPs or LUNs or shares or controllers. I didn't have to connect to RTP and tell it all about Sydney, and I didn't have to go connect to Sydney and tell it all about RTP.
And if one of these is Amazon, that's just Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. It shows up in the list if it's Amazon as well.
Does it show differently in the list?
No, it actually says Amazon East, Amazon West, etc.
Oh, okay.
So when we go back out of here, I'll show you. There's a few places we bring Amazon right into the UI so that it feels like another data center. The other thing that's cool, we talked about the federation, the power of the federation. So if I define a rule that sends a backup to Sydney once an hour and says keep it for 24 hours, in Sydney, somebody could go add OmniCubes into that environment. Doesn't matter. I never need to change any policies. Data will just start flowing into those new cubes. Someone could go start taking cubes out of the environment in Sydney, and I don't have to have any knowledge of that. So at the macro level, you define a policy to a destination. You could do a complete tech refresh of a destination, right? You could go into Sydney. In this case, Sydney has one node. You go to Sydney, add a new node, evacuate the old node, and you've done a complete tech refresh of Sydney, obviously the micro example with a single node, but you never had to change IPs, details, you never had to go reconfigure anything.
When Sydney,
Go ahead.
when Sydney is down or has problems or is broken, how do I know in this case?
You would get an alarm within vCenter that says Sydney is offline and needs your attention, or something more descriptive, hopefully, but depending on what the error is in Sydney, everything is designed so that the VMware administrator can manage the entire system. So all the alerts come up through vCenter. All the alarms come up through vCenter. All the tasks, you'll notice when we start executing tasks, are all tracked within vCenter. So the design concept here was not that you would have to read some manual to figure out how to run this, but think of it like a rental car. We're close to the airport. No, folks probably didn't rent cars here, but let's say you fly into a new destination, you get in your car, you get in the car, nobody opens the glove box, I hope, and reads the manual for the car. Instead, you adjust the seat, you figure out how to turn on the lights if you arrive at nighttime, and you drive away, right? It looks familiar, it's something you know how to do. If it's like me recently, you end up with a Mini, and it turns out you have to figure out where to put the key in the Mini. I got it though, I didn't need to look at the manual. But the concept though is if you know how to manage a VMware environment, you shouldn't need any training to manage this. So
RTP and Sydney are running separate vCenters at each site.
In this case they are. Mm-hmm. They could be the same, but in this case they're two separate vCenters. Mm.
And is there anything with the plugin using maybe annotations or tagging where I can have my apps use a policy? Since you're creating manual policies, is there any intelligence built in to maybe, like, this app is SQL Server, 2 web servers, and I want this policy for it? Is there any, do you have to manually build that, or?
You would do it, so when you create a VM, you give it a policy, and that policy just sticks.
So, are all policies VM based, or could I do a folder or some
It's
other
all
way?
VM based.
Okay.
So when you create a data store gets a default policy, so that any VM you drop into that data store, you will never get surprised by, hey, why didn't anyone put a policy on that VM? So there's a default policy that it inherits when you put it into a data store, and then every policy is set at the VM level. So once a VM has a policy, it's stuck to that VM by design until you go adjust it. You can change them in bulk if you want to do something like that, but they're all at the VM level.
And only one policy per VM, or can I mix and match?
Only one policy, but a policy can be a whole bunch of rules, right? It could say back up to RTP on Tuesdays at midnight, back up to Sydney every day. So it can be if we looked at that policy piece, you'll see that there are actually a series of rules already listed for the policy. Brian jumped into one of those specific rules. That rule is the how often do you take it, how long do you keep it, where do you send it? But you could have a whole pile of that style of rule.
So here you can see there's a whole bunch of
different rules. There's 6 different rules on that
And do you tie into storage policies as well within VMware, within vSphere? vCenter, I mean.
With what objective?
I mean, just any kind of integration. Like if I create a storage policy within vCenter, does it go into SimpliVity?
It doesn't. So there's no connectivity between our
Okay, so it's totally separate.
our definition of a policy. Whenever the functionality of the management suite is adequate, we'll leverage all of their constructs. That's why we don't have our own data centers, we don't have our own clusters, right? All those things are pre-existing constructs. We don't want to reinvent them. Whenever there's something that needs to go beyond, that's when we put it in our terms. So if we back out of here,
From a storage point of view, is each location have as many OmniCubes as you stick together? They may be in different compute clusters, but is the storage part of it one big chunk of storage?
Storage part is one big pool.
So there's no thought of, if I'm replicating from Raleigh to Sydney, that I've got to choose which storage, because there will only ever be one, and is that infinitely scalable?
So the question around cutting pieces up, one of the things you'll find is that we bias towards simplicity. So there are things within the system. A great example is data protection. Today we put two copies of every piece of data in a data center. So we've had some requests for, can you do one copy, can you do 3 copies? And today there's not a manual dial for those things. That's done with the design of the vast majority of the time, this is the right answer. In the interest of simplicity, let's stay there. That said, if you look from a management perspective, it's not exposed. But if you look at it from an infrastructure perspective, then you have actually one-way protection, two-way protection, and three-way protection already exist. They're just not exposed to the user. Because if we look at, Sydney has one OmniCube, so we support one-way. Any other environment has two-way protection, 2 or more nodes. And it turns out during some migration cases, you actually have 3-way protection. So the system is designed to deal with all those. But it's a question of, from a manageability perspective, balancing complexity with kind of power of that experience.
Jesse, we got a 1 hour time check.
1 hour time check. Right, so that means we need to go much faster. Because the most interesting content is farther on in the presentation.
Yeah, well, sorry to interrupt, and a question about API access. So am I able to access this information through APIs?
So everything that you can do through the CLI, or everything that you can do through the GUI, can be done through an XML interface as well. So you can communicate with the system that way, and it can all be everything can be executed. The only exception to that is deployment can't be mechanized that way. That changes shortly.
Okay, so it's an XML SOAP type.
Yeah, so you basically build an XML command that tells us what to do and all the parameters, all those details. You just feed it into the interface and off it goes.
Okay.
Is that deployment of a VM or a deployment of another
deployment
OmniCube?
of a cube. So that's all getting pushed into the API as well. So in the interest of getting to the deeper technical content, which is probably the stuff that everyone's most interested in, I'm going to accelerate through a couple steps here. So if we jump down into one of these data centers and we look at it, this is the core view our customers look at. So on the far right-hand side, there is used capacity. In this case, it looks like we've got about 24 terabytes free, 4 terabytes used. If we go to the left-hand side of this, we'll see a couple different colors in this chart. The green, believe it or not, there's a thin green layer at the top of that bar chart, which is 9.5 terabytes of logical capacity is allocated to VMs running in this data center. 1,010.8 terabytes are allocated to backups of VMs running in this data center. And in this case, 6.6 terabytes are allocated to backups of VMs running somewhere else. So the backups were replicated in, and we allocate logical space for them. So deduplication, compression, and optimization shows you a net savings. Obviously, that savings is not just capacity savings, but because the dedupe is inline, also is savings around your IOPS, your WAM replication, things like that as well. So if we take a clone of a VM while we're talking, sorry, the screen is a little small in this resolution. We'll take a quick clone of one of the virtual machines. And what you'll see is there's a SimpliVity clone at the bottom of this menu. So we can do the traditional VMware clones, we have a VAI plugin that offloads that to us. Unfortunately, the VAI NFS offload doesn't work for a running VM. It only works for a VM that's powered off. So we have the SimpliVity option. Just go ahead and execute it. And the SimpliVity option allows you to do that on a running VM as well. So we'll see, someone asked about the management experience. Those tasks show up down below as a task within the environment. So if we, and that's finished, it's now registering the VM's been cloned. Let's jump into the VM view somewhere so we can see the backups of that VM that we were just looking at.
And there's no need to rehydrate to clone that.
Yeah, there was really only a couple IOPS actually that occurred to do that. So we can see here, this is the VM view now. And within the VM, this is, for me, the coolest view in the product. This is every backup of this virtual machine, regardless of its location. So you'll see data center here is a column. These live in Sydney, RTP. If they were in Amazon, it would list Amazon there. We can just pick one of these, right-click on it, and say restore. And you pick a destination. So this one happens to be in Sydney, so let's restore it back into RTP. So the backup was sent to Sydney when it was taken. We restored into RTP, say restore. We warn you that you're moving over the network. We don't want to surprise anyone. We move as little data as possible, but we still just want to make sure that people are aware that's happening. You'll see those tasks, and this usually takes not too much time. Yeah, so that's back, been restored. Usually that's 15 seconds plus or minus within our environment. Now, obviously, this is deduplication, compression, optimization at work, right? So
Are you doing any kind of verification that, the data coming across is good or successful? And so that way, if I'm doing a restore, I don't, if I'm backing up crap, I'm going to restore crap.
Well, so we don't boot the virtual machine and do an FSCK of the virtual machine or do a check disk on the VM. We do know the integrity of the files within our file system, but we don't go into the VM and do a validation inside the VM. It's something that could be automated and certainly could be done. All you'd have to do is restore it, tear off the networks, and run a check disk or something like that. Just an idea for an automation feature to add for us.
Have you got any way to do file level recovery without recovering the whole
That is a fantastic question. So we've had a few questions about file level recovery. File level recovery, there's a video on YouTube that shows a demo of file level recovery. It's coming out in, I'm dangerous with dates, so I'm not going to give you a date. I spend too much time with engineering to know what the precise date is. Our major release that's coming shortly has file level restore, but you can see how it works. It's actually a pretty cool feature where you see restore in the list VM, you see restore files, you march through the file you want, you pick it, and it actually brings it back to the target VM as removable media. So you go into your VM, you see, hey, there's a new DVD here, what would you like to do with that? Copy the file out. When you eject it, we automatically clean up the DVD image and you're done.
So I can't say overwrite on destination or anything like that, but
no,
physically have to go and...
By design, we didn't allow it to overwrite. There's just all sorts of challenges that come with.
Yeah. Can you do that to an Exchange server?
So we work with
mailbox restore.
We work with Kroll OnTrack for that functionality. So almost every vendor out there secrets actually partners with Kroll OnTrack. They tend to just wrap a pretty wrapper around it and call it something else and charge more for it. We just thought it was simpler to tell you the vendor that does that. They make a great product. You restore an ARM, execute a restore, you point their tools at the device, and you can do that style of restore, mailbox or message, etc. So that VM's back. I just want to show one more thing here on the demo. The clone we took at the very beginning, if we right-click on that clone, and do a move of that VM. So this is a brand new VM. It's been around for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, however long we've been demoing. What the system's going to do now is figure out all the potential destinations for that. So Sydney is the destination here. So let's do a move to Sydney. What the Federation will automate is unregistering that VM from the RTP data center, pull it out of the data store in RTP, make sure that all that data has been moved to the Sydney data store, or into the repository there, inject that VM into the data store, and then import it into the vCenter environment in that data center. So the operation...
And re-IP and everything?
We do not re-IP it. So you would have to re-IP it once you get to the other side.
But the point is to stage it over there so you can...
Yeah, so it's there. I mean, so re-IPing is absolutely a necessary step at the end. The hurdle of moving, I think in this case it's a few hundred gig. The hurdle of moving that VM in a few seconds to the other side, we think is a pretty significant accelerator to the...
But if you extended your layer 2 to the other data center to Sydney, you wouldn't have to re-IP.
True. If you could do, you could try and vMotion. You could do all sorts of things. What we see in the field, though, is that it's not... Very seldom do we see L2 networks actually spanning geos. It's pretty rare still.
Do you see people leveraging like SRM for things like that?
We do see SRM some. It's interesting. SRM wants to think of the world in terms of data centers. We think that the world is a little more micro than that, so there's an opportunity to be more fine-grained than data centers.
Is there ever a need to run SRM on top of SimpliVity, or is that generally you wouldn't bother?
So we don't have an SRA today. What our customers have told us is that if they can click a bunch of VMs and hit restore and they all come back, they're pretty happy with that from a management experience. So we will work with SRM moving forward. It's not something we do today because most of our customers are happy with the current offering.
So are you going to get? But you want that automation piece. I mean, I want to.
Yeah, the last mile is an important step, and it's absolutely one that we're paying attention to.
So it's something that you're working on, but
yeah, it's not something that the product does today. We have customers who've scripted the whole thing. It's pretty simple actually to take the last step of scripting that. So we've actually done that. That was a look of skepticism. It's actually, once you get the VM to the other side, if the restore is a single command, re-IPing is actually not the end of the world on the other side. So we have folks who've completely automated it with some fairly straightforward scripts that we've actually
there's just a little bit more than just re-IPing. I mean, there's, if I want to get into the actual VM and do some automation there,
sure,
that's where I can leverage SRM.
Yeah, I'm not trying to minimize the value of SRM. It's a good tool, certainly. For today, our customers find batch selecting a group, restoring them allows them to be up pretty quickly. We think that automation helps things. So there's SRM. We're also integrating with other automation tools to leverage them as well.
I mean, ultimately, so you don't do a full DR within the product, or you do?
Correct, we do not. So we get with the VMs on the other side, you need to take that last step of making sure it's on the right vSwitch.
So if I lose Sydney and this system will not automatically fail me over to
correct
the other site?
Correct.
Okay.
It's designed to have all your data there and everything ready to go.
Gotcha.
The actual bringing those VMs online is
to us.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Is easier. So I want to try and accelerate through this because I'm concerned we're going to miss some of the coolest content that. I drove engineering to file patents this week so I could talk about a couple of them, so I want to make sure we get to that.
Well, why don't we just jump straight to that bit then?
Yeah, we'll jump straight there. So we'll get there, I promise.
Okay.
So you see that the clone moved, just to close on this, all the tasks showed up here. It's done. It usually takes about a minute. In this case, wow, it actually took exactly a minute.
40 seconds.
40 seconds. So that wraps the demo. Unless there's any other questions, we'll jump into some data efficiency.
Hyper-V support coming soon?
Yeah, so today our shipping product is vSphere. KVM and Hyper-V are both roadmap items that we've done public demos of, both of. It's just a question of when they come actually out.
You'll be integrating with System Center?
Yeah, so the goal from a platform perspective is always to integrate with the native management experience. So, for example, in our KVM environment, you can do it all through existing Nova and Cinder drivers, things like that.
What, is your reliance on Virtual Center pretty strict? If Virtual Center was to go down, would your replication stop, or is it just a management plane that's not?
It's a management plane. So in order to take actions in your environment, you need to have, obviously to create a new VM, to do things like that, you need vCenter within your vSphere environment. Our system continues to serve data. Everything stays up and running with vCenter online. Yeah, it's interesting. It seems to be a hot topic in the field about vCenter. We do use vCenter also today for an arbiter. That allows us to run smaller data centers. So any environment that is less than 3 nodes, obviously somebody needs to settle debates, whether you call it quorum or arbitration or whatever it is. So we leverage a actually an agent, a service that we run inside of vCenter, although that's actually been separated now, so you can run it as an independent service in small environments.
Just a quick question in terms of scale. Obviously, you can run a single OmniCube per data center, but you wouldn't have any high availability or that kind of thing.
Right.
So can you run as small as 2 OmniCubes, and is there a maximum size or number for the data center and also for your global federation?
Yeah, so the way we think about that question is go back to the livestock question for a minute. It's the question of is what is the scale? Is it how many pounds of meat you produce, or is it how many animals you have, right? If you're a cattle farmer, you probably think it's more relevant to answer how many pounds of meat you have. If you're a chicken farmer, you probably want to count animals if you want to have the biggest number. In the end of the day, we think what matters is how many VMs you can run within your environment, so that's actually what drives scale for us. So if we look at our environments today, you can scale up within a data center, you can scale up across data centers as well. The numbers in terms of total federation support are 32 nodes within a single federation. The number within a data center is 8 nodes within a data center. If you look at that number, though, it ripples out pretty quickly. If the nodes are really the limiting factor for you, you can add compute nodes into those environments, and pretty quickly you end up with the effectively full cluster size within that environment from a data center perspective as well. So those limits are also continue to increment with every release of the product.
So you can, sorry, I'm not sure I understood that then. So if within a data center you can have up to, you can have 8 storage nodes. The max is
cubes.
8 cubes. But then you can extend up to 32 nodes.
Well, you could add compute nodes into those environments. So for customers where CPU and memory become the limit, and you just want to run more VMs, you can add compute nodes into that environment and continue to drive the VM count within your data center up. Unless you've become storage bound, generally our customers are not storage bound. And our customers are ranging from, I don't have the slide in this deck, but there's the Tech Validate survey we did. 95% of our customers get at least 5 to 1, and something like a third of them get over 50 to 1. We have customers who are getting almost a petabyte per cube. Now, I would not suggest that that's what you should use from a sizing metric, but we're very seldom disk bound within these environments.
So as far as just dropping in more compute nodes, then you're just bound by the vSphere cluster size.
Exactly.
In terms of capacity, not I/O. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Right. But then those compute nodes aren't OmniCubes, they're
off-the-shelf x86
something
systems.
else, okay.
Correct. Yep.